We're now joined by our good friend Steve Politi, sports columnist at NJ Advanced Media. Check him out on NJ.com and Old School, Star Ledger. Hey, Steve, listen, you blew me away with a column you wrote. What did I learn in 2020? The coronavirus was no match for the human spirit. It was powerful, meaningful, impactful. Why'd you write it, and what was the message?
Yeah, Steve, I was thrown into, like a lot of people, I was thrown into a different role when the pandemic started, and I was covering all the stories of people overcoming and really rallying during the pandemic. And what I saw was just so many examples of normal people who really rose above their circumstances to make a difference in their communities. And, you know, a guy like Greg Daly, who's a paper delivery person who was bringing not just newspapers to his subscribers, but groceries to people who couldn't get out of their houses. And, you know, just stories like that that really touched me. And when I thought back on what I learned during 2020, it was really that as tough as the pandemic was, it was not a match for just the human spirit.
What about the guy, 55 days on a ventilator, Michael, say his last name?
Somek.
Tell us about him, because it was so moving.
Yeah, you know, and this is a story that really touched me. Again, he's a guy who drove himself into the hospital. You know, he thought, I just need a quick checkup. I need some oxygen. I'll be back in a couple of days. And, you know, right away he was put on the ventilator. And, you know, what I wanted to capture in that story was just what his family went through and how they really suffered through these days without knowing if their father and their brother and their son was going to make it through. And, you know, and what he told me at the end was just when he got through it, he realized that if he had died, he would have just not been there anymore. But what struck him in thinking about it was just the number of lives that would have been changed, and the way, you know, that's what keeps him up at night was just thinking about how his friends and his family and his daughters would have been touched if he didn't make through this struggle.
Let me try this one. By the way, is the other one I want to ask you about in a second is it Peter Cave?
Yes. Yeah,
I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but I'm going to ask you about sports. So
okay.
The role of sports, not just for those of us who are obsessed with collegiate sports and professional sports. I hold this up all the time. I'm old school. Derek Jeter will always be the greatest Yankee of the last generation. That being said, the role of high school sports and sports in our lives in COVID, during COVID and beyond. There's a question here, I promise. What if kids lost who couldn't play, compete, be involved in sports, particularly in high school?
Well, I think that was a devastating thing, especially for the athletes this spring. You know, I talked to one girls softball player who was 3 hits away from a city record and having her name in immortality. And all she wanted to do was just have one more opportunity to be on the field with her teammates, just to enjoy that, just to have that experience. And, you know, it's something that the athletes in the spring lost. And one reason why I think it was a good decision.
Spring 2020.
It's
spring 2020.
Correctly. You're correct. Yes.
So what could it mean in 2021 in the spring as we get closer to it? We don't know how the vaccine is going to play out, but say we can play safer, that kids can be out there. What would it mean to those kids? By the way, the other kids really got hurt terribly, but go ahead, Steve, I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think you know, we saw this fall what it meant. You know, it was a difficult decision to have them have football season go on, soccer season, but, you know, with the precautions and, you know, the kids took it very seriously. They policed themselves in a lot of situations to make sure they could keep playing. And I think it made a big difference. You know, I think you saw a lot of communities rally around their teams. I live in Montclair, where they had 2 state championships soccer teams. And yeah, I think you saw just how important that was for those athletes and for the parents and just for the community to have something that resembled normalcy.
Yeah, by the way, I'm Montclair as well. That was a big deal for our town. So tell me, is Peter Cave? Who's Peter Cave, and why does Peter's story matter?
Well, we did a story on 24 Hours in Crisis about every reporter at NJ Advanced Media was farmed out across the state to capture different scenes during the pandemic. And mine was to go to a crematorium in the cemetery. I get all the good assignments, Steve. And I had just stumbled upon a man's funeral in which his family couldn't attend. And it was just very it just struck me as very emotional. His relatives were outside a fence, outside of the cemetery because of the restrictions on outdoor gatherings, and I happened to be there. And in watching this happen and watching this very quick funeral service, I just thought it was extremely unfair that this man's life didn't get the treatment that we all need when we were mourning. So I went back and I did the best to report on, what had happened to him, who he was, what his life was like, and of course, what it meant to his family not to have this opportunity to mourn him. And I wanted to be able to write about their experiences and just what we've lost. It's a bigger picture of what, as communities, what we've lost because of this.
By the way, check out NJ.com to see Steve's, not only this column about the human spirit and connection to COVID, but everything else he's written. We have about a minute left. Let me ask you this. I've interviewed you so many times, a lot in my radio work and here as well. You've always struck me as an upbeat, positive guy. Question, and I actually interviewed Eric LeGrand. Check out our website, steveadubato.org, for an extraordinary interview, not because of me, but because of LeGrand. Talk about a positive attitude of former Rutgers superstar, paralyzed in 2010 game against Army. How do you stay positive, Steve? Got a minute left in the midst of all this, this crisis, COVID and beyond. How do you stay so positive?
I think you have to focus on the stories and the people who are doing uplifting things, and they're not hard to find. I mean, they're all around us, and that's part of like the pizza guy who took out a $50,000 loan to pay off his employees, and the guy who owned a gym who went around in a mascot costume to help kids work out. I mean, there's just so many examples of that, and and when it did get overwhelming, and when things, there are many bad days, you're trapped in your house with your kids, you want to kill them, I understand, but it wasn't hard to find examples of the human spirit that really kept a smile on your face.
I'm going to repeat what I said before offline to you. I'm going to repeat it again. Reading your work on a regular basis, not just about sports, but about our lives and about the human spirit, has been helpful to me, and I know I'm not alone. So to Steve Politi, sports columnist at NJ Advanced Media, I want to thank you, not just for the column we talked about, but for the work you do every day. Best to you and your family, Steve Politi. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. That is the more important Steve Politi. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by IBEW Local 102, Hackensack Meridian Health, Gibbons PC, NJM Insurance Group, and by Operating Engineers, Local 825. Promotional support provided by AM 970 The Answer and by Insider NJ.